Mr. President, I came to the floor today to talk about something that has been top of my mind for a period of time, and I wanted to bring it to members' attention today because of some recent articles of late as it relates to national security and global competitiveness, particularly as they relate to domestic resource development. In recent months, since the beginning of this administration, I've spoken out in concern at the direction that I've seen the new administration take with regards to energy security and how that relates to Alaska. I've spoken out at length about my opposition to several of these executive orders that were very early on relating to leasing and permitting moratoria in my state. In fact, there were 8 specific orders that were directed to one state and to one state only. That's a pretty hard hit for Alaska. In other areas, I don't believe that additional federal lands and waters in Alaska should be placed off limits. We are already, as a state, we hold more public lands than any other state, and by considerable degree. I don't believe our public land order removal process should be paused. This was an announcement that just came out of Department of Interior last week. They say they're pausing it, but effectively it could be delayed or abandoned, not just for these next 2 years going forward, but permanently. And what this effectively does is it creates almost de facto wilderness, if you will, because you have placed land in a limbo, in a purgatory for decades. Nobody can do anything with it as these PLOs, these public land orders, remain in place. No great secret around here. Like most Alaskans, I strongly support our resource development industry and the men and the women who work within it. They're my friends, they're my neighbors, I fish with them. I recognize the importance and the value of what they do, and I've worked hard here in the Senate and for a long time to ensure that the industry's continued centrality is allowed to prosper, not only because of them, the people that I know, but because of what it means for our country, for our economy, our state's budget, our prosperity, and also for our environment. After years of lagging behind, the United States has come to a better place on energy in recent years. We've seen domestic production rising. We've seen our emissions falling. We've created jobs. We've generated revenues. We've changed the world geopolitically, even as we have lessened our impact on the climate. But these kind of gains can't be taken for granted. They can't be actively ignored, and they certainly should not be discarded. We have to acknowledge that this energy renewal has not been even across the country. It's taken place largely on state and private lands. We've got very limited private land in Alaska, and state activity we've been proudly producing for a while. But we also have much land that is federally held, and we've only seen help arrive with any kind of activity and production on federal land in the past few years. And I would suggest that we cannot afford that forward progress to be reversed. But unfortunately, that's the way it feels right now. The threat is that this administration is going to take an approach that is going to take us backwards. And so the question, I think, is a fair one for us to ask, to discuss here. It's an important question. What happens if we just decide we're going to turn our backs on this, our American energy? What happens if we really do move in this direction of just keep it in the ground? What happens if we really do close our eyes to our domestic energy sources, these assets, that we close our eyes to the contributions that they provide. And I'll suggest to you that there's a few warning signs that we have up on the horizon. Oil prices are back up above $60 a barrel. This actually helps my state. I'll be honest there. We'll accept that for budgetary purposes, but we all talk about what happens typically around Memorial Day. You've got driving season coming on. We're still in the midst of a pandemic. But if the U.S. artificially restricts its supplies and demand rebounds rapidly, where does this put us? And so I mentioned that there have been some articles of late that just really kind of struck me. And it's interesting because I thought they were pretty significant, but it seems like they're relatively unnoticed here in Washington. According to Bloomberg, Russia has now supplanted Saudi Arabia to be the third largest supplier of crude oil in the United States. Canada is our number one. But there's been a series of circumstances. As our domestic production is falling, the Saudis have also reduced theirs. And it's been Venezuela. Venezuela is subject to sanctions. Their production has pretty much gone offline to the United States. Part of what we're seeing, though, is the refusal on the federal government side to approve cross-border pipeline infrastructure. And so Canada, again, is our largest. We import more from Canada than anywhere else, and they've got greater capacity to help us out here so that we don't have to take it from Russia. But instead, we haven't been able to take more from Canada to fill in that gap because of pipeline capacity. So what happens is we're sending more of our money to Russia at a time when we're not on very good terms with Russia. Need we say elections? Need we say solar winds? Need we say, what we're seeing from Putin? So, but this is what's happening. We're sending more of our dollars to Russia, and they are sending us more of the resources that we could produce here at home, or perhaps at least import them from some friendlier nations. U.S. crude oil production fell from an average high of 12.2 million barrels per day in 2019 to an average of 11.3 million in 2020. According to the Energy Information Administration, this loss in domestic production will return the United States to being a net petroleum importer in 21 and 22. And by all accounts, a sizable chunk of this will come from Russia. So what's going to happen, Mr. President, is we're going to move from that position of where we have been in these past few years, where we have had some real energy security here, because we have been producing, and we've been producing to the point that we've been able to even supply to our friends and allies. But now, with policies that are taking us in a different direction, and still knowing that we need the resource, we're turning to Russia. And this is what really galls me so much. In 2020, the U.S. imported 538,000 barrels of oil per day from Russia. In Alaska, we recognize Alaska as the great producing state, despite our immense potential and desire to bring it to market, in 2020, we're producing an average of 448,000 barrels per day. So it just begs the question, is this what we really want? Is this what we really want, for Russia to account for more of America's energy supply than Alaska's? Now, we both have similar environments, both big, but oil production goes on in areas that are tough to produce in. And I will hold Alaska's environmental record over that of Russia any day. In fact, over most countries and even most states any day. One article put it this way. They said, America's increasing reliance on Russian oil is at odds with U.S. energy diplomacy. And, let's kind of put it in context. The position that we've taken with Nord Stream 2. Basically, what we've said is we're asking those in Europe who need Russia's gas. We're saying we need to be tough on this. We need to break Russia's hold here for all the right years. It's been 7 years since Russia annexed Crimea and demonstrated to the world that they're not afraid to flex their muscles when it comes to energy exports in order to achieve their geopolitical goals. So we've been saying on Nord Stream 2, Europe, hey, you guys don't go there. And yet we have to look at ourselves here, because we then, if we're telling Europe, limit your reliance on Russia for gas, but over here, we're happy to step up our imports from Russia on oil. Now, the president has just recently imposed tougher sanctions on Russia, as he absolutely should. But I think we need to be eyes wide open here, folks, in terms of what it means when we need that resource. Now, I do recognize that much of this discussion in Russia and how Russia has supplanted Venezuelan crude, I recognize that most of the oil that's being imported is heavy, and that this is a situation with our Gulf Coast refineries that are specifically geared for that. And I do recognize that they have fewer options right now. But I do think that this is a conversation that we need to be talking about, that we just can't sit back and say, well, this is just the way it is. Congress and the administration need to be taking the steps necessary to ensure that we in this country have a strong, stable supply of domestic energy to meet our current demand, our future demand, and to the greatest extent possible, the demand from our allies. Russia is positioning itself to capitalize on all of that. They produce from wherever they want, and they're going to sell to wherever they can. And the least that we can do here at home is to support our own responsible production from states like Alaska, so that we've got our own supply, and can provide a diversified commercial alternative. So moving from oil and gas briefly here, Alaska is also ready to help in another increasingly crucial area, and that is with mineral development. Our history of tectonic events has created a geological environment that fosters deposits of a wide variety of minerals that are critical to both our current and our future economies. Back in 2018, the Department of Interior designated 35 critical minerals based on their importance to our economy and security, as well as their susceptibility to supply disruption. And these minerals are essential for everything. They help us with our advanced missile systems, solar panels, batteries for electric vehicles, your cell phones, everything. Our military is certainly aware of this. They recognize the vulnerable position that we are in. Our manufacturers recognize the vulnerability. These are products that we use on a daily basis. Right now, the U.S. is import reliant on 31 of the 35 minerals designated as critical. We've got relatively no domestic production. We rely completely on imports to meet our demand for 14 of these. And of course, most of where we are importing these materials are from China. That's not okay. That shouldn't be acceptable to us. I think we all should agree on the need to rebuild our domestic mineral supply chains, and there's been good, positive conversation about what we can do. But I feel that this is one of those areas of growing vulnerability. It used to be we would talk about our vulnerability on the Middle East for our oil, and then policies changed, and we reduced our reliance on that, and that's why I'm anxious, I'm concerned about what I'm seeing translate going forward. But I think we need to be, again, eyes wide open when it comes to our mineral dependence and our reliance on these important materials for what we need to be a strong nation. I think that this is a pressing, a long-term security threat that we face in this country. We've seen it play out in light of the COVID pandemic. We've seen the vulnerability of international supply chains. I thought it was great. It was so important that the administration really focused in on this. The new administration is focusing on this in a good way, and I appreciate that. When President Biden first, when he released the first part of his infrastructure proposal and focusing on international domestic supply chains, he's got one section there about electric vehicles. And in the White House fact sheet, it says that the plan will enable automakers to spur domestic supply chains from raw materials to parts, retool factories to compete globally, and support American workers to make batteries and EVs. This is a type of policy that we should all want to get behind, broaden out to every industry, not just to a select few. But the question here, though, is whether the administration is willing to accept that what is going to be necessary in order to achieve this goal, to have these secure supply chains, especially when it comes to expanding our domestic supply of raw materials, it's going to require approval of mining projects. And that's been a challenge for us. That's been a challenge for us. And this is where I go to another article that came up a few weeks back. This is from Reuters. But it appears to me that rather than looking within our own borders, the administration is looking beyond. In this article from Reuters, it states, U.S. looks to Canada for minerals to build electric vehicles. And it provides, the U.S. government is working to help American miners and battery makers expand into Canada, part of a strategy to boost regional production of minerals used to make electric vehicles and counter Chinese competitors. And it goes on further to talk about the different ways that the Department of Commerce is discussing with many how we can boost Canadian production of EV materials. It goes on further to say, but Washington is increasingly viewing Canada as a kind of a 51st state for mineral supply purposes. I'm a big fan of Canada. They're our neighbor. But if we're going to be adding Canada as a 51st state to help us with our minerals and access to minerals, let's not forget the 49th state, because Alaska has good, strong resources. Where we seem to have problems is gaining access through whether it's permitting process or just the ability to move forward with some of our mineral potential. And so, again, I'm not suggesting that we shouldn't be looking to our friends to build these alliances, particularly with our neighbors direct to the north and to the south. This is good. I'm not suggesting let's not be talking to Canada. This is an important part of how we really work to build these secure supply chains. All I'm suggesting is that we here in America need to also look to the strength of our resource assets. Now, there are some, again, the issue of mining in this country sometimes can be a controversial one, but I'm going to suggest to folks that if we really want to do more to build out not only our national security, but if we want to build out our clean, diverse energy infrastructure, moving towards the President's vision of greater renewable opportunities, which I want to do, let's acknowledge that we're going to need these minerals. We don't really have a choice here. The World Bank recently released a report looking at the mineral intensity of clean energy transition. They found that, quote, large relative increases in demand of up to nearly 500% are estimated for certain minerals, especially those concentrated in energy storage technologies such as lithium, graphite, and cobalt. The report also found that even with large increases in recycling, including scenarios where 100% end-of-life recycling is achieved, there is still likely to be strong demand for primary minerals. So we know we're going to need it. People like Elon Musk last year says, "Please mine more nickel." He promised, "Tesla will give you a giant contract for a long period of time if you mine nickel efficiently and in an environmentally sensitive way." With you on that. Or look at the analysis from Goldman Sachs, who found an increasing demand for electric car batteries is causing automakers to brace for a surge in prices of lithium, cobalt, and nickel. So again, Mr. President, in order for us to get there from here, in order to achieve a transition to renewable and cleaner technologies, we've got to acknowledge that there's going to be a mineral footprint. It will be impossible to establish a robust domestic supply chain for EVs and batteries if we continue to import the raw materials from other nations, including some that continue to dramatically outcompete us in these areas every year. I think we need a rational, clear-headed, eyes wide open approach to energy and mineral development. We don't want to go back on energy, and we can't be caught flat-footed on minerals. We've got the resources. We have the highest labor standards in the world, the highest environmental standards in the world. Our energy workers, our miners, they'll hold themselves to those standards. So instead of importing more from places like Russia and China, we need to free ourselves from them to the extent that we can and establish ourselves as this global alternative. So I've kind of taken that. It was actually not something new. At the beginning of the 116th Congress, I prepared a white paper. We called it the American and Global, we called it the, it's a pretty cool title. It was a great little publication that should have gotten more notice, but like a good wine, it comes with time. With powers so disposed, America and the global strategic energy competition. And I outlined in this a strategic energy initiative designed to sharpen and direct our tools of energy related to economic statecraft and enhance the geopolitical position of the country. So I am introducing from that, as a jump off from that, I'm introducing my Strategic Energy and Minerals Initiative Act. We call it the SEMI-Act. This legislation will enable U.S. companies to better compete in global markets, promotes the responsible domestic production of our oil and our gas and our minerals. I think these are initiatives that are good for us to be looking critically at, again, as we move forward with this administration's priorities on not only how we can build infrastructure, build it better, build it cleaner, build it with a renewable future, but we have to recognize that when we build things, we need base elements. And so know that Alaska is ready, willing, and able to play a role on all these fronts. We've got tremendous stores of resources, but equal to those tremendous stores of resources is the responsibility that I believe Alaskans feel to be good stewards as we access those resources, to allow for a level of sustainability, whether it is with our fisheries or whether it is with the subsistence livelihoods of those who rely on the food and animals on the land. We believe that we can contribute to our national security and our global competitiveness while at the same time working to protect the environment. But what we need is the chance to be able to do so.